President Obama said a lot of things. President Obama, in his first presidential campaign, completely chastised and repudiated the George W. Bush foreign policy. But in reality, he has been far worse in terms of foreign policy, in terms of using drones, in terms of targeting civilians, in terms of violating the sovereignty of other nations. So I would predict that this missile system they will continue, and they will appropriate huge sums of money at the expense of the citizens. And the citizens of the United States and other Western nations, they don't support this degree of adventurism and provocations. Well, Foreign Minister Lavrov is right on point in calling for an end to this NATO missile system, but I think this also calls into question the existence of NATO. What NATO has become is a tool and a mechanism to extend Western hegemony all over the world. NATO was originally developed as a European-based organization and an alliance based solely in Europe to counter the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. And since 1990-91, there has been no Soviet Union, there's been no Warsaw Pact, and NATO should have been dissolved then. But instead, the West, particularly the United States, and its corporatist philosophy, has used NATO to go all over the world to raid and harvest resources and to destabilize, particularly in the Middle East, and to implement regime change. And it's very interesting that the West uses the term defense when actually they are engaging in offense. They use the term Russian militarism when in fact the West, particularly the United States, and by way of NATO, are establishing NATO bases, and they use the term NATO bases all around the Russian Federation, encircling Russia in an attempt to box in Russia and an attempt to destabilize Russia both geopolitically and economically. So Foreign Minister Lavrov is quite correct and right on the mark when he talks about calling on NATO to cease this missile system. And it's very interesting that while the United States and the Western nations that are members of NATO pour billions of dollars into missile systems and offensive weapons, the citizens in their own countries are going without. Their education systems their programs are in horrific conditions. Their infrastructure is in horrific conditions. The social programs and the social dynamics are in horrific conditions. You can contrast that with that of the Russian Federation between 2008 and 2012. The Russian Federation essentially cut by half its offensive weapon capability. So you look at who is more interested in world peace in terms of action than not words. Russia has invested large sums of funds in developing its country and developing its social programs and assisting other countries, and has actually cut its offensive weapon capability, while the West and NATO has expanded its offensive weapon capabilities at the expense of its own people. And I think the term hypocrites come to mind when we look at the United States and NATO and the West, when we look at the term, peace and peacemakers. They're certainly not peace and peacemakers. They are engaged in state-sponsored terrorism. They've engaged in economic terrorism, but they have quite a media machine in terms of Hollywood, and to a lesser degree in Europe, particularly the BBC and in the German media, spinning for them to make them look like the good guys, when in fact the opposite